Rebecca Gaines, 23, appeared to have the entire world at her feet. She was the envy of many of her peers for her attractiveness, intelligence, and charisma, and she had many friends and admirers. But Rebecca's journey had not been easy. She grew up in poverty with an abusive and alcoholic father who abandoned her family when she was 4 years old. Left to raise a young child on her own, Rebecca's mother worked hard to provide for the family, but it never seemed to be enough. Despite having a single parent, Rebecca grew up in a loving environment. She was a talented student, excelled in all of her classes, and made many friends in high school. After graduating from high school, Rebecca managed to pay for college by taking out student loans, working as a waitress, and doing other odd jobs. She graduated with honors from Portland State University in her hometown of Portland, Oregon. Rebecca hoped to one day become an English literature professor. She intended to attend graduate school to further her education, but after college, with student loans due and other bills piling up, she needed to find a full-time job that paid well and quickly. This led her to have Baby Girls just outside of Portland. Baby Girls was an exclusive men's club, a polite term for the area's most popular strip club. When she started working as a barman, her natural beauty became a popular attraction for the men who came to the club. Even though she wasn't a stripper, the money was sufficient for Rebecca to pay her bills and work at night while attending graduate school during the day to pursue her dream. Ben Overton, 45, an accountant, found himself dead just outside his Portland home on July 22, 2003. No signs of violence or struggle were visible when they discovered him alone in his car in the driveway. He appeared to have just returned home from a night out, but he never entered his house. Detectives Max Reynolds and Edwin Lee, who were on the scene, reported that he appeared to be asleep. However, they observed something unusual. Overton's lips were blue, and there appeared to be a frothy substance coming from his mouth. A subsequent autopsy revealed that Overton died from a massive heroin overdose, which is common with these symptoms. On August 24th, less than a month later, authorities discovered Matt Duff dead in his condominium. Duff, 29, was a corporate attorney who was just starting out at the large firm Knight and Camper in Portland. He showed the same symptoms. His lips were blue, and froth came out of his mouth. They also classified his death as a massive heroin overdose. Then, on September 3rd, less than 2 weeks later, they discovered a third body. They found Joe Ferguson, 57, a wealthy local businessman, in his office. His lips were as blue as the others, and his mouth was frothy. The cause of death was a massive heroin overdose. With 3 similar and unusual causes of death in such a short period of time, detectives Max Reynolds and Edwin Lee began to wonder if there was a connection. They looked for a connection between the 3 deaths. All 3 were well-to-do professionals with no criminal records and no prior drug use. All 3 were in excellent health, and none had suicidal tendencies. All 3 were men, but there appeared to be no connection between them. There was no evidence that any of the 3 knew one another. None of the 3 lived or worked near one another. Overton, the first victim, was a divorced father of 2, while Duff was single. Ferguson, the most recent victim, was married with 3 children. As the investigation progressed, things became even more complicated. The discovery of another heroin overdose victim occurred on Saturday morning, September 27th. This time, it was James Anderson, a local real estate agent. A local nightclub's parking lot found Anderson, 38, in his car. Baby Girls was the name of the club. With the 4th death, detectives Reynolds and Lee started to suspect a pattern. They began their investigation into the latest victim's death by tracing Anderson's movements in the hours before his death. The night before his death, they found James Anderson last seen at Baby Girls, where he spent most of the night sitting at the bar. They discovered him dead in his car the following morning, the victim of a massive heroin overdose. This prompted the detectives to investigate whether there was any connection between the other deaths and Baby Girl. They interviewed the nightclub's staff and regulars, showing them photos of the other 3 victims to see if anyone recognized them. Except for Rebecca Gaines, nearly everyone interviewed said they were regulars at Baby Girls. She said she'd never seen any of them at Baby Girl's. With the majority of Baby Girl's staff and patrons identifying all 4 victims as club patrons, Detectives Reynolds and Lee began to piece together a disturbing pattern. The only thing they had in common was their interest in Baby Girls. Could their actions there have contributed to their deaths? Following this discovery, the detectives began to investigate the club more closely. They re-interviewed the entire staff, including Rebecca Gaines. Rebecca continued to deny seeing or knowing any of the 4 victims, but her actions began to raise some concerns. Rebecca had always been friendly and cooperative, but now she became irritable when questioned. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to piece together additional clues. They interviewed Rebecca's colleagues again, learning more about the 4 victims and their interactions with the staff. All 4 had a history of binge drinking and hitting on female staff members. Angel Fairchild, one of Rebecca's co-workers, remembered overhearing a very drunk Ben Overton conversing with Rebecca one night. Stella recalled that Ben was very interested in Rebecca's personal life and had asked her numerous questions. Desiree Franklin, a co-worker, remembered Matt Duff talking to Rebecca just a week before his death. Rebecca appeared to be very charming and friendly with Matt, according to Destiny, which was typical of her behavior with clubgoers. Other staff members recalled Rebecca engaging in a profound conversation with James Anderson at the bar the night before his death outside the club. These interactions directly contradicted Rebecca's claims. The detectives initially identified her as a witness, not a suspect. Her status as merely a witness perplexed the detectives. Was she hiding something? As a result, Detectives Reynolds and Lee began to concentrate on Rebecca. They re-interviewed her colleagues at Baby Girls and discovered Rebecca's darker side. She had developed a strong and growing resentment for men, particularly those who objectified her at the club. Many of her co-workers recalled Rebecca being overly friendly with certain customers, but they also remembered her making disparaging remarks about them. The detectives also began investigating Rebecca's background. They learned about her difficult childhood, which included an abusive, alcoholic father and a mother who struggled to support the family. Rebecca had worked hard throughout college and graduated with honors from Portland State University. She had aspirations of becoming an English professor. She pretended to be a hard-working student and barmaid, but she actually had a much darker side. The detectives also spoke with some of Rebecca's college friends. One friend, Sarah Rosehill, remembered Rebecca complaining about how unfair life was and how much she despised men who abused women. Another friend, Emily Norris, recalled Rebecca telling her about all of her disappointing relationships with men and how she wished she could pay back all of the men in her life who had hurt her. In addition, the detectives learned that Rebecca loved true crime. She frequently discussed famous cases and appeared to be extremely knowledgeable about forensic science. The detectives wondered if she was using this knowledge to cover her tracks. With each new piece of evidence, the detectives' suspicions grew. They knew they needed to act quickly to keep Rebecca from harming anyone else. They began to pay closer attention to her movements and conversations. As a result of the surveillance, the detectives began to collect additional evidence linking Rebecca to the deaths. They discovered evidence that Rebecca had purchased large amounts of heroin, the same drug that had killed all 4 of the victims. However, in order to build a case against her for murder, the detectives required more concrete evidence that directly linked her to the crimes. Are you interested in more true-life murder mysteries? Don't forget to like our content and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories. How do you feel about this case? Or do you have one you want us to investigate? Leave a comment. Until then, be safe. The detectives were getting closer to discovering the truth. They began to suspect Rebecca's involvement in the deaths of Ben, Matt, Joe, and James. They began to watch her closely and gather more evidence. They suspected Rebecca had been using her knowledge of true crime and forensic science to hide her tracks. She was meticulous in her planning and left few clues. Nonetheless, they were determined to bring Rebecca to justice and end the series of mysterious deaths. The investigation was becoming more intense, and the detectives knew they needed to act quickly before Rebecca vanished or caused further harm. As the detectives, Reynolds and Lee, gathered all of this information, they began to get a clearer picture. They believed Rebecca used her charm to get close to her victims before giving them heroin-laced drinks. Overdoses of heroin are typically slow-acting, lasting 1 to 3 hours, which may explain why one of the 4 victims died near the club. The detectives, determined to uncover the full extent of Rebecca's crimes and bring her to justice, set the stage for a dramatic conclusion. However, Rebecca realized the authorities were after her when the detectives questioned her for the second time. She became increasingly paranoid, convinced that it was only a matter of time before the detectives arrested her. As the detectives closed in on Rebecca, they obtained a search warrant for her flat. The detectives entered Rebecca's flat on the afternoon of November 4, 2003, while she was supposed to be in class. They found a large hidden stash of heroin and syringes. They also discovered a notebook in which Rebecca expressed her anger and hatred for men. One entry stated, "They think they can treat me like that? I will demonstrate to them, and that will be the final instance in which a pig produces a female." Another said that they all deserved what they got. "Nobody will suspect me."
But after
These
looking for a
entries
day,
showed
they
the
didn't find any
detectives how
cold water,
dangerous Rebecca was,
relevant data
but
such as the
Rebecca was
large
aware
PC
of their
screen,
pursuit and remained one step ahead. She had installed a security camera in her apartment, and when she saw detectives enter, she knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. In an act of rage and revenge, she devised a desperate escape plan. That morning, before the club opened, Rebecca approached the baby girls with a can of gasoline. She poured it around the club and lit it on fire. The flames quickly spread, engulfing the entire building. The fire department swiftly arrived and extinguished the fire, yet the club faced complete destruction. Only charred cinder blocks remained, and while staff and customers wondered who had done it, the detectives already knew. They found petrol traces and came to the conclusion that someone intentionally set the fire. They also discovered Rebecca's fingerprints on a petrol can outside the club, which provided them with the final piece of evidence. Rebecca did not stick around to witness the aftermath. She fled to Canada after starting the fire, hoping to start over and avoid capture. But she did not stop there. Rebecca knew she had to keep moving to stay ahead of the police. Over the next 13 months, she moved constantly, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. She traveled from Canada to Cuba, then Mexico, where she blended in with both tourists and locals. She stayed in Mexico for a few weeks before traveling to Costa Rica. Rebecca secured a job at a surf shop in a small beach town in Costa Rica. She dyed her hair and wore glasses, attempting to alter her appearance. She hoped that the laid-back atmosphere and constant influx of tourists would help her remain hidden. She also studied Spanish, hoping to blend in with the locals. For a while, it appeared to work. Rebecca settled into her new life, constantly looking over her shoulder while attempting to stay under the radar. Meanwhile, in the United States, Detectives Reynolds and Lee did not give up on her case. They were determined to locate her. They collaborated with international authorities to track her down. After more than a year of searching, they discovered that Rebecca had traveled to Canada, Cuba, Mexico, and Costa Rica. They realized they were getting close to catching her. One day in early March 2005, a visitor to the surf shop noticed Rebecca. The tourist, an American named Jane Meyer, thought she looked familiar. Jane was from Portland and had seen news stories about Rebecca. She remembered the case's details and concluded that the woman at the surf shop could be the fugitive. Jane contacted local authorities, who in turn contacted the U.S. detectives. The detectives were ecstatic to finally have a solid lead. They flew to Costa Rica to confirm Jane's tip and collaborate with local authorities to plan Rebecca's capture. The detectives followed Rebecca for several days to ensure they had the right person. They saw her go to work at the surf shop and then return to her small apartment. Everything matched the description they gave her. They realized it was time to make their move. Early on March 24, 2005, detectives and local police surrounded Rebecca's flat. They knocked on the door and called her name. Rebecca didn't immediately respond. She was scared and unsure what to do, but she knew she couldn't run any longer. Rebecca opened the door and noticed the police standing there. She realized it was over. The detectives in Costa Rica approved her extradition, arrested her, and brought her back to the United States for trial. During the trial, the prosecution, led by ADA Hillary Johnson, presented all of the evidence they had collected. They displayed surveillance footage, heroin syringes, and a notebook containing Rebecca's bitter entries, which they had recovered from her apartment. They also had witnesses testify about Rebecca's previous behavior and interest in true crime. Rebecca's defense attempted to argue that her traumatic childhood caused her to be mentally unstable. They claimed that her father's abuse and her mother's struggles had left her profoundly scarred, but the jury was not convinced. They believed Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing when she carried out the murders. On August 8, 2005, they convicted Rebecca Gaines of 4 first-degree murder counts and 1 arson charge. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The families of the victims felt relieved that justice had been served, but they also felt the indelible pain of their loss. Detectives Reynolds and Lee felt a sense of accomplishment after stopping a dangerous killer and bringing peace to the victims' families. Rebecca Gaines's story became a cautionary tale. It demonstrated how a bright and promising young woman could turn her herd into something horrible, ultimately becoming a serial killer. For years to come, people would remember Rebecca Gaines' story as a shocking example of how deeply hidden anger and trauma can lead to unthinkable behavior.